The first time Daniel handed her a coffee, he almost dropped it. It was early, barely 7:15, and the usual buzz of Midtown hadn't kicked in yet. The air was wet with February mist, streetlights still blinking like they hadn't woken up either. He had just left his apartment, dragging himself toward the cafe on 3rd and Lexington, trying to force some structure into another day at the office he didn't care about. She sat right outside the entrance, not leaning, not slumped, just sitting upright, with her back against the brick, hands folded neatly in her lap, like she was meditating on the chaos of the city. No sign, no cup out for coins, just a battered wool coat and sharp eyes that followed people as they passed people who didn't look back. Daniel noticed her for one reason: she didn't beg. She didn't look like she expected anything. He didn't plan to stop. He had a meeting at 9 a.m. and a million excuses not to care. But something made him hesitate as he reached for the door. Guilt, maybe, or curiosity, or boredom pretending to be compassion. He stepped inside, ordered his usual double shot, almond milk, 1 pump vanilla, and then, almost without thinking, added, and just a regular black coffee. He didn't even look at her when he handed it over, just walked back outside, turned to the right, and offered the cup like a handoff. She took it without a word. The next day, she was there again. Same spot, same posture, same air of quiet defiance. Daniel didn't hesitate this time. He ordered 2 coffees, one for himself, one for her. When he stepped outside, she looked up, met his eyes, and said, "Black, no sugar." Her voice was calm, unbothered, like she'd been doing this for years. He chuckled despite himself. "You remember?" She didn't smile, just took the cup and nodded. "Routine matters," she said, then took a sip. That was the beginning. He didn't know her name. She never asked for his. But the ritual settled into place like a rail clicked onto its track. Every weekday, 7:15 a.m. sharp. He'd show up at the corner cafe. He always ordered her coffee the same way, black, no sugar. And she'd always be there, waiting not with desperation, but with expectation. Like this was part of her morning, too. At first, it felt performative, a small act of kindness to balance the existential weight of spreadsheets and quarterly reviews. But after a week, it started to feel necessary. On the mornings he didn't want to face the day, she was there. On the days he wanted to disappear, she saw him. She never asked for anything more. No food, no cash, no long conversation. But sometimes, she talked. And when she did, her words landed like knives made of glass. One morning, as she sipped from the lid and stared across the street at a delivery truck unloading crates, she said, "People don't stop because they don't care. They don't stop because if they do, they have to admit they're not much different." Daniel blinked. "Excuse me." She didn't answer, just sipped again and nodded like she'd just said the weather. Another time, she looked up from her coffee and said, "You know what's funny? People think comfort means safety. But comfort can be a cage, a nice one, warm, but still a cage." He didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded like he understood. But he didn't. Not yet. Weeks passed. They never exchanged names, never shared more than 5 or 6 words, and yet Daniel began to look forward to those 5 or 6 words more than anything else in his day. He started watching her more closely, how she kept a small spiral notebook in her coat pocket, how she sometimes wrote in it when she thought no one was looking, how she hummed, just a little, when the street sax player hit the right note across the avenue. She wasn't crazy, she wasn't lost, she was observing. A week before everything unraveled at Blue Water, he asked her a question. "Do you sit here every day?" She took a long sip and said, "I sit where people forget to look." That didn't make much sense, but it stuck with him. Because she was right. People did forget to look. He forgot too. But he was starting to notice things again, details he used to overlook, like how the barista with the tattooed hands always rang up his order before he finished speaking, or how the light on 3rd turned green 1 second longer than it used to, or how the woman outside the cafe somehow always knew exactly how he took his coffee, even though he'd never once told her. It was bizarre, really. Their unspoken contract, no name, no story, just coffee. But that changed when she said his name. One morning, maybe 5 or 6 weeks into the routine. She took the cup from his hand, locked eyes with him, and said, "Thank you, Daniel." He froze. "Wait, how do you know my name?" She didn't answer, just sipped the coffee, stood up and walked away. She didn't return the next morning, or the one after that. She was gone. Daniel stood there, 2 coffees in hand, scanning the sidewalk as if she might materialize from the mist. The brick wall she usually leaned against looked naked without her. Cold. Indifferent. He waited 5 minutes, 10. People passed him without looking twice. Eventually, he drank both coffees himself. One tasted like ritual, the other like something stolen. The next morning, she was still missing. And the morning after that? No note, no trace, no explanation. He told himself it didn't matter, that it was just a coincidence, a quirk of routine. But her absence hit with the weight of something bigger, something unfinished. He kept ordering the second coffee, kept bringing it out with a flicker of hope, but the sidewalk stayed empty. 3 days passed, then 5. On the 6th morning, he didn't order 2. He stood in line, irritated, tired, jaw locked from a night of poor sleep and worse dreams. As he stared at the pastry case, it hit him he'd never once asked her name, never asked where she went at night, never asked if she was okay. He had treated her like a mourning habit, like part of the scenery. The guilt turned his stomach. She'd known his name. She remembered his coffee order. She listened to him complain about meaningless meetings and missed promotions, and he gave her nothing. "You sit where people forget to look." Her words came back to him like an echo in a long hallway. What if something happened to her? He stepped out of the cafe and looked up and down the block. No sign of her coat. No voice in the crowd. For the first time in weeks, he walked to work without her in his mind's periphery, and it felt wrong. That day at Blue Water was the beginning of the end. Layoffs were rumored. The halls buzzed with nervous energy. His manager had been uncharacteristically polite, like a man comforting a pet before taking it to the vet. Daniel tried to focus, tried to pretend the absence outside the cafe wasn't affecting him, but his mind kept drifting to her. Who was she? And how the hell did she know his name? That afternoon, he looked for her in places he'd never dared before, beneath the overpass on 9th, behind the gas station near the off-ramp, in the alley next to the old hardware store. Nothing. Later that week, he tried the Midtown shelter, thinking maybe she'd gone there. But when he asked the staff if they knew a woman who sat outside the cafe on 3rd mid-50s, silver streak in her hair, always drank black coffee, they just shook their heads. "Sounds like half the city," one volunteer said with a shrug. Daniel left feeling stupid. Why did he care so much he didn't even know her name? But he couldn't shake the feeling that something had passed between them. Not romance. Not even friendship. Something stranger. Quieter. Like threads between 2 people that neither of them pulled. But both felt. He missed her words. Comfort can be a cage. That one stung. It was too accurate, too familiar. His job had been a cage. A nice one. Cushioned, climate-controlled. But it kept him from himself. From asking bigger questions. From listening to anyone outside his narrow little world. And somehow, she had seen that. A week passed. No sign of her. By then, the axe had dropped at Blue Water. They called it a strategic restructure, as if rearranging people's lives was just a shift in furniture. Daniel was let go with a handshake and a packet of HR links, and suddenly, the cage was gone. He thought he'd feel free, but instead, he felt untethered. That was the day he walked 3 extra blocks to a different cafe, hoping maybe she'd moved, that she was still sitting somewhere, drinking black coffee, delivering quiet truths to anyone who bothered to see her. She wasn't there either. But someone had scribbled on the newspaper bin outside. "Even empires fall." He stared at it for a long time. Was it hers? Had she written that? Or was the city just speaking to him now, using whatever voice it could find? That night, Daniel opened a notebook he hadn't touched in over a year. A leather one, with pages still blank past the first few. He began writing down everything she'd ever said to him. Line by line, word for word. He didn't know why. Maybe to remember. Maybe to try and understand, maybe because some invisible part of him hoped she'd return. He started walking a little differently after that. Slower. Eyes up. Watching. Not just for her, but for anyone he'd forgotten to see. He wasn't ready for how quiet the days would become after the layoff. Daniel tried to keep a routine. He still got up at 7, still walked past the cafe, still paused outside where she used to sit, even though the bricks stayed empty and the street kept moving like she'd never been there. The first few days, he played the productivity game, updating his resume, drafting cover letters, checking job boards like they were stock tickers. But nothing felt real. He wasn't chasing a purpose. He was just scrambling for a paycheck, the same way everyone around him seemed to be doing, holding their breath under the weight of bills and expectations. He applied for jobs he didn't care about, jobs with sterile titles and descriptions that read like puzzles designed to weed out anyone with a soul. Fast-paced environment, team player, detail-oriented, self-starter, all code for do what we say, stay late, and don't complain. At night, the silence was worse. He kept thinking about her, about the way she would stare at people like she was measuring them, not judging, just reading. She'd seen something in him. Maybe even before he'd seen it in himself. He started rereading the things he'd written in the notebook, her phrases, her riddles. You sit where people forget to look. Comfort can be a cage. Even empires fall. They weren't just poetic fragments anymore. They were warnings. Blue Water was his empire. He'd built his identity around a job that vanished with 2 signatures and a meeting that lasted under 10 minutes. Now he was nobody. No suit, no status, no office. Just a guy sitting in a kitchen with a mug full of lukewarm coffee and a head full of questions he didn't know how to answer. He thought about going to the shelter again, not to find her this time, but just to do something. He needed to feel useful, even if it wasn't billable. He emailed them asking if they needed volunteers. The director responded within an hour. They always needed people, so he started showing up 3 mornings a week. It was mostly grunt work, prepping food, cleaning up, folding sheets, organizing hygiene kits. But he didn't mind. The work was honest, tangible. It didn't pretend to be anything more than what it was. On his 3rd shift, he asked one of the older volunteers, Terry, if he'd ever seen a woman who matched her description. Silver streak in her hair, mid-50s, sharp eyes, black coffee. Terry shook his head. Sounds familiar, but a lot of people come and go. Why, she a friend? Daniel hesitated, something like that. You sure she was homeless? He blinked. She was living on the street. Terry nodded slowly. That don't always mean homeless. Some folks choose to be there, not because they want to suffer, but because they've seen what it costs to stay inside the system. Daniel didn't know what to say to that. He'd never considered it. Not really. That night, he wrote in the notebook again. Not just her words this time. His thoughts. What her words meant. What he thought they meant. It became a kind of ritual, not like the coffee. Something deeper. He started reading more, books on purpose, philosophy, business ethics, not because he thought they'd help him get hired, but because they helped him feel awake. Like he was dusting off a part of his brain he hadn't used since college. His friends didn't really understand. Some pitied him. Some offered to pass along his resume to their firms. But none of them asked what he wanted. They just assumed he was desperate to get back on the hamster wheel. He wasn't. Not anymore. He didn't want to climb another ladder just to end up in the same empty place. He wanted to build something that mattered, whatever that meant. He still didn't know her name, still didn't know where she'd gone. But she had shifted something inside him. She didn't just disappear from a street corner. She left a fault line behind. One morning, while sorting donations at the shelter, he found a beat-up paperback with notes scribbled in the margins. The inside cover read, "Who we become when no one's watching is the only self that matters." There was no author name, no signature, but for a second he swore the handwriting looked familiar. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, flipping through the worn paperback from the shelter. The spine cracked every time he turned a page, like it was exhaling secrets. The writing in the margins wasn't just commentary, it was conversation. Whoever owned this book had argued with the author, circled contradictions, added thoughts in a quick, sharp script that matched the voice still echoing in his head. He didn't know for sure if it was her handwriting, but he wanted it to be. There was one note that stopped him cold. Every system serves itself before it serves people. If you want to help, don't ask permission. That line stayed with him. Daniel didn't show the book to anyone. He started carrying it with him, reading pages on the subway, underlining lines she hadn't touched. The book had no title page, no cover, just words, ideas, warnings. He was no longer sending resumes like a machine. He still applied here and there, but only when a company's mission made sense. Mostly, he worked at the shelter, kept writing, and without quite realizing it, began rebuilding himself. One day, after a food run, he sat outside the shelter with Terry and two of the other regulars. They were swapping stories, old jobs, strange clients, bad bosses. Daniel laughed for the first time in weeks. Then someone mentioned a woman who used to visit the shelter briefly during cold snaps. Smart as hell, he said. Sharp dresser. Talked like she used to run a company, then just dropped off the map. Daniel leaned forward. Did she have a streak of silver in her hair? Yeah, the guy said. Didn't catch her name. She was only around a few days. Daniel didn't press. He didn't want to make it obvious he was searching, but a name would have helped. Something. Anything. That night, he walked to the cafe again. He hadn't been back in weeks. The barista still remembered him, gave him a small smile as he paid. He bought 2 coffees, out of habit, or hope. He walked outside. She wasn't there, but he left the second cup on the ground anyway, beside the brick wall, just in case. And for the first time, he sat down, right where she used to sit, cross-legged, back against the wall. People passed, some glanced, most didn't. The sidewalk looked different from down there. The world moved above him, fast and blind, just like he used to move. After 20 minutes, he stood, stretched, and left the second coffee untouched. He didn't expect her to return, but he was starting to realize that maybe her disappearance was the message. Even empires fall. He had built an empire of status, comfort, and control, and it had crumbled, quietly, without ceremony. She had seen it coming. She had warned him. She had done something else too, something he hadn't seen clearly until now. She had left on purpose. She didn't need saving. She had been testing him, and he hadn't even realized he was being tested. The next morning, Daniel returned to the cafe again. 2 coffees, one for himself, one for the sidewalk. She didn't appear. He didn't expect her to, but he kept doing it. Every morning for a week, he sat where she used to sit. Same spot, same time. People started to recognize him not in a friendly way, just in the way city dwellers log patterns. A businessman seated on the ground with no sign, no ask, just a coffee next to him and a notebook in his lap. On the 5th day, a young woman dropped a crumpled dollar bill into the untouched cup beside him. Daniel blinked, startled. It's not for me. She just shrugged and walked off. He didn't move the money, just let it sit there, like an echo of the mistake everyone kept making, thinking they knew what someone needed based on how they looked. That afternoon, he returned to the shelter. Terry greeted him with a nod. Your friend show up yet, he asked. Daniel shook his head. Well, Terry said some people are just meant to pass through, leave a mark and vanish. Daniel looked at him. What if they left the mark on purpose? Terry raised an eyebrow. Then you better figure out why they left it on you. That night, Daniel lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The book sat on his chest, open to a page where the margin held another scribbled note. Real change happens in the shadows before it's seen in the light. She hadn't just vanished. She'd retreated, pulled back to see what he'd do without her there. It wasn't about her needing help. It was about whether he would keep going without someone watching. She had disrupted his life, then left it in his hands to figure out what came next. And he had to admit he was different. The job he'd lost no longer felt like a loss. The absence of money, power, and routine had stripped something false from him. He'd started asking better questions. He'd stopped chasing the illusion of security, but still he missed her, not because he needed her, but because he wanted to say thank you. For the dismantling, for the push, and because deep down, he wondered if their paths were really finished overlapping. He flipped to a blank page in his notebook and wrote her a letter. He didn't know if she'd ever read it, didn't even know her name, but he wrote it anyway. You were right, the system is a cage, but I don't want back in. I want to build something else. If you're still watching, thank you. The next morning, he left the notebook on the wall next to her old spot. Coffee beside it, no explanation. Then he walked away. Daniel didn't go back to the cafe for 3 days. Not because he gave up. He just needed distance. Letting go wasn't surrender, it was trust. If she was ever going to come back, it wouldn't be because he waited like a lost dog. He threw himself into the shelter, took on more shifts, helped write a small grant proposal when he found out they needed funds for winter gear, built a simple spreadsheet system to help organize donations. People started calling him the guy who fixes stuff. It felt good. Real. Still. In the quiet moments walking home, sipping coffee on a bench, lying in bed, he thought of her. Wondered where she was. If she had read the note. If she had ever intended to return at all. Then, on the fourth day, he went back. Half out of habit, half out of something deeper. The notebook was gone. He froze on the sidewalk, heart skipping like a scratched record. The coffee cup was gone too. In its place, tucked between a crack in the bricks, was a folded piece of paper. No name. Just a line written in the same sharp handwriting that had haunted his memory for weeks. Even empires fall, but some are rebuilt. His throat tightened. She'd been here. Not gone, not vanished. Watching, testing him. He turned the paper over. On the back, a time and address. No signature. It felt like a challenge, or a door cracking open. That night, Daniel barely slept. The address was in Chelsea, an upscale co-working space that didn't match anything he knew about her. He Googled it, expecting nothing, but the results surprised him. Soltera Strategies, a consultancy firm specializing in organizational turnarounds, nonprofit pivots, and corporate reinvention. He didn't remember applying there, but something about the firm intrigued him. Their website wasn't flashy. It was brutally direct. One tagline: "We don't fix what's broken. We rebuild it from the bones up." He stared at the line for a long time. Then at the time written on the note 90M, and below it, in smaller text, "Bring your truth." What the hell did that even mean? He arrived 15 minutes early, wore his best jacket, the one with the slightly frayed collar, printed out a fresh resume, practiced his pitch in the lobby. The receptionist handed him a water bottle and pointed toward a glass-walled conference room. He stepped inside, heartbeat hammering. A young man in a blazer greeted him, introduced himself as Matt, head of talent. They chatted casually. Matt asked him about Blue Water, about the shelter work, about the spreadsheet system he built. "You're not the typical applicant," Matt said, flipping through his file. Daniel laughed softly. "I'm not the typical anything right now." Matt smiled. "That's not always a bad thing." Then he stood and said, "Our CEO likes to meet all final candidates personally. She should be here any second." The door opened behind Daniel. Footsteps. He turned, and there she was. Tailored coat, silver streak, sharp heels, same eyes. Calm, knowing, silent thunder. He couldn't move. She stepped forward, extended her hand like nothing had ever happened. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Eleanor Reyes, CEO." Her face didn't register surprise. No recognition. Just business. Daniel shook her hand, his own trembling. Not because he was afraid, but because everything: the sidewalk, the coffee, the vanishing, the notebook, the letter had led here. And now, the person who had dismantled him piece by piece was sitting across the table, pretending they'd never met. "Let's begin," she said. Daniel couldn't stop staring. She wore the same calm expression she'd had on the sidewalk, only now it came with a $900 blazer and the weight of authority. Her hair was pulled back, not tucked under a knit cap. Her hands clean, manicured, rested lightly on a leather-bound folio. "Mr. Carter," she said, flipping to the first page of his resume. "Walk me through what you've been doing since Blue Water." He swallowed. This was it. The test. The final layer. He had two options: play the role he'd rehearsed, or speak from the place she had forced him to find. He didn't hesitate. "I burned out," he said. Her eyes flicked up. "I spent years chasing someone else's version of success. I measured my worth in productivity and job titles. I ignored people unless they were in my network. And when the job was gone, I realized I didn't know who I was without it." She said nothing. "I started volunteering, not because it looks good, because it kept me human. I didn't expect anything to come out of it, but it woke me up." Still no reaction. "I used to think strategy was about control," he continued. "Now I think it's about seeing the truth no one else wants to look at and having the guts to act on it." That got something: a tiny shift in her expression, like the corner of a mask cracking. She turned a page. "You didn't list the Midtown shelter on your resume. I wasn't sure if I should." "Why not?" "Because it wasn't work. It was undoing." That made her pause. "Undoing what?" she asked. He looked her dead in the eye. "Everything I thought I needed to be." Silence. Then she leaned back in her chair. You're not like most applicants. He gave a half smile. You already knew that. She ignored it. Why do you want to work here? She asked. I don't want to work here just to have a job. I want to build something that makes people uncomfortable in the right way. I want to shake systems that only protect themselves. He exhaled. And if I'm being honest, I think I've already started. She tapped a pen against her folder. Tell me something. Mr. Carter, she said, when you brought me that first coffee, what did you see? Daniel didn't expect the question. He searched her face. For the first time, she seemed open, unmasked. I saw someone invisible, he said, but only because I wasn't paying attention. And now I see the person who made me pay attention. She smiled, not out of politeness, out of recognition, out of respect. You've passed, she said. Daniel blinked. What? She closed the folder. I don't interview for resumes. I interview for clarity, for readiness. I needed to know you hadn't just changed your story. I needed to see if you had changed your lens. He sat back, breath shallow. You were watching the whole time, he said. I wanted to know who you'd be when no one was watching, she replied. Now I know. A long pause. Welcome to Solterra, Daniel. His eyes burned. He didn't know what to say. Don't thank me, she said, standing. This wasn't charity. You earned your way out. Daniel didn't go out that night. He didn't call anyone. He didn't post about the job. He didn't even tell Terry. He just walked through blocks he used to rush through with headphones in, past coffee shops, billboards, business towers that used to mean everything. Now, they looked like monuments to someone else's life. He paused on a quiet corner, his hand still curled around the business card Eleanor had given him. Solterra Strategies, Senior Analyst, Strategic Development. Below it, she'd handwritten Start Monday. Bring everything. He knew what she meant. Not a laptop, not a suit. Everything. Everything he'd been through. Everything he'd learned from the street. From the silence. From falling out of the system and surviving it. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the worn, margin-scarred book. He flipped to one of the notes she'd written. The system won't save you, but if you understand it, you can choose what to break and what to build. Daniel smiled. Monday came. He arrived early. No type, just clarity. The office wasn't like Blue Water. There were no corner offices, no glass egos, no manicured mission statements, just clean workspaces, whiteboards full of questions instead of answers, and a team that looked awake. Real awake, not caffeine jittered or buzzword hypnotized. Eleanor greeted him with a nod. Nothing more. She handed him a binder labeled simply Case Zero. He opened it. Inside a nonprofit struggling with mission drift, a 6-month backlog of strategic paralysis, a toxic executive board, no direction. We don't coddle clients here, she said. We make them honest. Ready. He met her eyes. I was made for this, he said. No, she replied. You were remade for this. She walked away, heels tapping out a beat he now recognized as hers. Daniel sat down at his new desk. No photos, no accolades, just space. He pulled out the notebook, laid it next to the binder, and started writing, not about what he used to be, but about what came next. 2 months in, Daniel had found a rhythm. It wasn't easy. Solterra wasn't a place for coasting. It demanded full attention, full honesty, full skin in the game. Their work didn't chase trends, it exposed blind spots. They took on nonprofits with bloated mission statements and legacy corporations pretending to care. They tore down the facades and asked the hard questions no one else would. Daniel was good at it. Not because he was the smartest person in the room, but because he'd been dismantled. He'd lived in the space between collapse and choice. He understood what it meant to be invisible, then seen, to be broken, then rebuilt with intention. That edge couldn't be taught in a seminar. It had to be lived. He never mentioned the cafe, never brought up the coffee. Neither did Eleanor. She was professional, focused, unsentimental. But every now and then, when they passed each other in the hallway or reviewed a brutal client report side by side, she'd glance at him like she knew the ghost he used to be. It was enough. She'd given him a kind of mentorship that had no name, no schedule, no feedback forms. She had seen him before he saw himself, and that was more than enough. One late evening, Daniel stayed behind to finish a proposal. Everyone else had cleared out. The city lights blinked through the windows like stars caught in traffic. He rose to stretch and walked past the executive lounge. The door was cracked. Inside, Eleanor sat alone, sipping tea, a book in her lap. He froze. He knew the book. The book, his book. The margin-scarred paperback from the shelter. The one he'd found, the one he'd carried, the one he'd left behind. She turned a page without looking up. "I didn't expect to see that again," he said quietly, stepping inside. She looked up, calm, no surprise. "I didn't expect you to recognize it," she replied. He walked closer. "It was yours all along." "No," she said, setting the book down. "It was yours the moment you chose to keep reading." He nodded, trying to find the right words. "I wrote you that letter," he said, left it with the book. "I didn't know if you ever read it." "I did," she said, "every word." "Why did you choose me?" he asked. "Out of all the people who walked past you, why me?" She gave him a long look. Not warm, not cold, just true. "Because you paused." He blinked. "That's it. That's everything," she said. "Everyone else kept walking, but you paused. Once, then again, and again. Long enough for your eyes to start seeing, not just looking." She leaned back, the edge of a smile on her lips. "You thought I was invisible, but you were the one who was lost. I just held the mirror." Daniel let the silence stretch between them. "Then you never needed the coffee, did you?" "I needed the pattern," she said, "to see who would break it." He let out a quiet laugh, full of disbelief and wonder. "You turned a sidewalk into a proving ground." "I turned a sidewalk into a lens," she said. "You decided what it showed." He looked at the book again, at the handwritten notes, the dog-eared pages, the thoughts scribbled in margins like blueprints for dismantling a life. He met her eyes. "I'm not who I was." "No," she said. "You're better." She picked up the book and handed it to him. "You should finish what you started." He took it. The weight was different now. Not heavy. Anchored. He started to leave but paused at the door. "What happens when you find the next one?" he asked. Eleanor smiled, almost to herself. "I sit where people forget to look." This story is a quiet blueprint for transformation. A reminder that real change doesn't come from titles, degrees, or polished resumes, but from humility, awareness, and the willingness to question everything you've built. It shows that sometimes, the people who appear to have nothing are the ones holding the clearest mirror to who we really are. Daniel's journey reveals that losing what defines you can be the first step to discovering what actually matters, and that empathy, curiosity, and showing up with honesty can open doors no credentials ever could. The world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs people who've been broken, paid attention, and chose to come back different. Thank you for watching and spending your time with this story. We hope it resonated with you as deeply as it did with us. If you found meaning, inspiration, or even just a moment of reflection in Daniel's journey, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story that might hit just as hard. Your support helps us keep telling powerful, human-centered narratives like this one. And we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below with your thoughts, takeaways, or what you'd like to see next. Your feedback shapes what we create, and your voice matters here.